Everyone, and welcome to the Impact Aid 101 webinar. It's just after 2, so we might do some introductions, give people a few minutes to filter in, but I am Ann O'Brien. I am currently the Interim Executive Director and the Longtime Communications Director here at NAFIS. I am joined today by Jason Scamenti, who is our Policy and Advocacy Director. And we are excited to get started and get into a little bit more about what Impact Aid is. So if you we would greatly appreciate if you could share your name and your school district in the chat so we know who's here. If there's anything in particular you're hoping to get out of the presentation today, if you want to ask that question in the chat now, we can look at it and try and address it as it comes up, or feel free to ask at any time during the presentation. And we can, if we miss it, we will take questions at the end as well. Today we're going to be doing an overview of Impact Aid. What it is, why it exists, who is eligible for it, and how it works. And we are also going to be talking about our advocacy priorities. So I think it looks like we have people from all across the country. We see South Dakota, New Jersey, Wyoming, Oklahoma, so Georgia, New York. So some names that we recognize and some that are new to us. So we hope that everyone gets something out of this. And again, let us know if there are any questions you have throughout the presentation. So quick introduction to NAFIS as well. So we are the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools. We were founded in 1973, celebrated our 50th anniversary just a couple years ago. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan association representing Impact Aid recipient school districts. We educate Congress and the administration on Impact Aid. We provide technical assistance to school districts and to Congress. We coordinate with the Congressional Impact Aid Caucus, and we serve as an umbrella organization for 4 subgroups. We are your voice on Capitol Hill, your source for Impact Aid information and technical assistance in your professional network. We have a conference coming up in Washington, D.C. in just a couple of weeks, September 14th through 16th. So if you have not yet registered to join us, we hope that you do. We also send out weekly newsletters and timely action alerts. So if you are not on our newsletter distribution list, if you want to email info@nafisdc.org, we'll be sure to get you on. And we are also on social media at NAFIS Schools, and that's Twitter, now X, and Facebook. All right, I mentioned that we are the umbrella group for 4 subgroups. So we have the Federal Lands Impacted Schools Association, FLISA, that represents school districts that receive Impact Aid Section 7002 federal property funds. The Learning Opportunity Impacted Schools Association, LOISA, which represents 7003 school districts that have a learning opportunity threshold or lot of under 50%. We also have the Military Impacted Schools Association, MESA, which represents school districts that serve a large concentration of military-connected children, and the National Indian Impacted Schools Association, NISA, which represents school districts serving children who reside on Indian lands. So in addition to NAFIS, your school district may also be a member of or want to look into joining one of these subgroups to get more information and to connect with peers in school districts with the same impaction as yours. So what is Impact Aid? Impact Aid is a federal education program designed to reimburse school districts for revenue lost when land is removed from local tax rolls due to federal activity. So that's your Section 7002 federal property program. And it compensates school districts for additional costs associated with the presence of federal property. And that's your Section 7003 basic support program. The program is developed based on the theory that most school districts receive about 50% of their funding from the state and about 50% of their funding from local taxes and fees on business and homes. When there is federal property present in a community, that decreases that local revenue, and that is what impact aid makes up. Again, when the federal government owns land, it's removed from the local tax rolls, and that causes a direct loss of revenue at the local level. And there might also be additional students present because of that federal land and because of the activities taking place on that land. And it's also possible that both of those circumstances may impact a school district. So a school district might be eligible for both 7002 and 7003 property or impact aid. So examples of a federal impaction, that could be a military installation, could be Indian Trust restricted or Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act lands, could be a federal low rent housing facility. Not all low rent housing is eligible for impact aid. It has to be those federally owned HUD properties. School districts can be impacted by the Service Member Civil Relief Act or other civil service activities like VA hospitals or federal prisons, national laboratories, national parks, national grasslands. Those are all examples of how a community can be impacted by federal ownership of land. Impact aid is the oldest elementary and secondary education program. It originally was 2 laws, the first of which was signed on September 23rd of 1950, and that law actually was specifically related to school construction. So the facilities needs of federally impacted school districts were first recognized by the federal government. The next was September 30th, 1950, and that was the law that assists school districts with the general, operating expenses. And that's what really acknowledges that the federal government is a landowner that needs to support their share of public education. When impact aid was first started, only civilian students, and they were specifically associated with defense activities. The civilian students associated with those defense activities were eligible. In the 75 years since, additional categories of students, including those military on and off base kids, Indian land students, and low rent housing students have been added. You might notice that date, 1950. We are just about next month to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the impact aid program. Currently, impact aid is Title VII of ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the latest iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was originally passed using impact aid as a vehicle in 1965. Impact aid was most recently reauthorized in 2015. It is due for reauthorization, but we don't anticipate that happening anytime soon. And it's a technically difficult law. There's a lot of nuance that needs to be considered in implementing it. We always say impact aid is an efficient program. The money that's appropriated by Congress directly goes to school districts. It does not go to states. It bypasses state involvement, unlike most federal education programs. And impact aid is also very flexible. Impact aid funding can be used by the local school district for any legal purpose, and it can benefit all students. It doesn't necessarily have to be those who are considered federally connected. So impact aid can be used for classroom materials. It can be used for staff salaries. It can be used for transportation or construction or technology or anything that the local school district needs. This is money that replaces lost tax revenue. And again, something that's unique about impact aid is it supplants. So it makes up for that local revenue. It does not provide supplemental funding that is aimed at a specific student need, like IDEA does, or like the Career and Technical Education Funds do, or Title I or other title programs. Impact aid can be used for any legal purpose. And states cannot consider impact aid in determining state aid. So this is intended to make up for local revenue. The state cannot consider it in making the determination of how much funding they give you. There is an exception known as equalization. For FY26, at this point in time, there are no states that are equalized. So your state should not be considering impact aid in its state funding formula. So the impact aid law has 13 sections in total. 4 of them have money tied to them. So one is Section 7002, and again, that's the federal property program. 7003, which is your basic support program, and that's for students that are connected to that land. There's a separate line item within there called 703D, children with disabilities. There's also a section 707 construction and 708 facilities. Now that is actually for facilities owned by the U.S. Department of Education. That is for the maintenance of those facilities. So 707 construction is money for school districts to improve their facilities, to modernize, to make safety upgrades. Facilities is for specific buildings owned by the U.S. Department of Education. So we are going to jump in section 7002, and Jason will let you take that away.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, in these next few slides, we'll discuss Section 702 Federal Property Program. When the federal government takes ownership of land, the property comes off the local tax rolls. However, school districts must continue to educate students in their district with less tax revenue. This program is designed specifically to help ease that burden. However, Section 7002 is funded at significantly less than the identified need. In fiscal year 2025, Congress appropriated $79 million for this section of the Impact Aid program. To fully fund the program, we estimate they would need to appropriate a total of $1.12 billion. So in order to be eligible for Section 7002 payments, property must have been acquired by the federal government after 1938. When acquired, the property is 10% or more of the assessed value of taxable property in the district. The property cannot be acquired in exchange for other federal property. And finally, the school district must not be substantially compensated by the increase in revenue from federal activities from this property. In fiscal year 2025, it was about 200 school districts were eligible for the Section 7002 payments. Eligible land includes, as Anne mentioned earlier, Army Corps of Engineers projects, national forests, grasslands, laboratories, federally owned dams and reservoirs, and much more. Eligible districts are paid either a foundation payment, which equals 90% of the payment received in fiscal year 2009, or an average payment for fiscal year 2006, minus the fiscal year 2009 combined. Minus FY09 combined. Sorry about that. After foundation payments are made, newly identified eligible applicants are paid on a prorated basis with the remaining Section 7002 funds. Here you can see an excerpt from our annual Impact Aid payments overview, which provides a snapshot of how Impact Aid funds are distributed in each state and district. Here we see 702 payments for Missouri for fiscal year 2024. They are broken down by school district, congressional district or districts, federal acres, total acres, percentage of federal acres, FY24 actual payment, and finally, what the full payment would have been if the 702 program had been fully funded. A dash in that full funding payment column denotes a school district that has selected the opt-out option for their 702 Impact Aid application and chose to only receive their foundation payment, foregoing their final payment. NAFIS is currently working to compile an updated payments overview for fiscal year 2025, and we hope to make that available in the next couple weeks. In summary, these districts have had tax revenues substantially reduced because the federal government took ownership of land. The federal government doesn't pay taxes. Impact Aid payments attempt to make up for this tax loss, but does so at a rate of only about 7 cents on the dollar as of FY24. Now I'll turn it back over to Anne to discuss the Section 703 Basic Support Program.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And Section 703 is the largest section of the Impact Aid law, both in terms of the money that is appropriated and the number of school districts it serves. So in FY25, it got $1.474 billion and served 932 school districts. That's actually the exact same amount of money that it got in FY24, because of the continuing resolution funding the federal government. And it's actually slightly fewer school districts than received funding in 24. Section 7003 includes a special line item, as I mentioned earlier, 703D, payments for children with disabilities, and that received just over $48 million in FY25. That number hasn't gone up since I started at NAFIS in 2018, and I don't think it went up for many years prior to that. So that number has been pretty stagnant for a long time. So to be eligible for Section 7003, a school district has to have 400 federally connected students in ADA, which stands for average daily attendance, or 3% of that average daily attendance has to be made up of federally connected students. Who are these students? So federally connected students are those who reside on federal property with a parent employed on federal property. So that's those are civilians. They might be someone like a park ranger who lives in a cabin in a national park. Federally connected students are those who reside on federal property with a parent on active duty in the uniformed services. We call those our military on-base kids. They reside on Indian Trust Restricted or Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act lands. They have a parent on active duty in the uniformed services but don't live on federal property. We call those our military off-base kids. They reside in federal low rent housing. Again, those are only the federal projects. Section 8 housing doesn't count. And then they can have a parent who either resides on federal property or works on federal property. So for those students, there's a slightly higher threshold to count students who are either live on or work on. A school district has to have either 1,000 of them in ADA, or they need to make up 10% of the district's average daily attendance. Your 7003 payment is going to be based on several factors, including the number and type of federally connected student in your average daily attendance, the actual cost of education, which is indicated by something called the local contribution rate, the school district's need for impact aid funds, which is something that's measured by the learning opportunity threshold or lot percentage, and congressional appropriations, which determines the lot percentage payout. So because the Section 7003 payment formula incorporates the number of federally connected students, you have to count them. And you have to do that every single year. Now, there were 2 years recently, FY22 and FY23, where school districts could use their pre-COVID student counts. Special legislation that NAFIS advocated for was passed, to allow that. We call it our COVID relief legislation. But starting in FY24, we went back to every year, you got to count your kids. And you got to do it at least 3 days after school starts and before January 31st. So that means you can't include it on your enrollment forms. You have to do a specific student count. Now, your application is going to have to be submitted this year by February 2nd, 2026. Typically, it has to be submitted by January 31st. That just happens to fall on a Saturday this year. But the student count has to be done before that date. You'll always have the opportunity to amend your application until June 30th. So if it turns out, if you get more parent pupil survey forms back, or you come across additional students that could have been counted in your initial application, you can amend it up till June 30th to ensure that you get the maximum number of kids you have in your district. There are 2 main options for counting your students. One is called the parent pupil survey form, and that is signed directly by a parent or guardian. That can be a backpack letter that goes home with a kid. The parent fills it out, signs it, returns it. It's possible that it will require additional certification from the BIA or HUD to ensure that the property the parent is connected to is actually, considered federally owned and eligible for impact aid. Those parent pupil survey forms can actually be sent home and signed electronically. Work with the Department of Education if you want to do that, to ensure you don't cross into something known as the Electronic Data Collection, or EDC, which is a new option for school districts that want to do that count electronically. There's also what's known as a source check, which is a school district provided document that lists the children associated with particular federal property. And then someone associated with that federal property verifies that the students actually, reside on it. The key in all of these count options is that connection to federal land. Impact aid is based on the land If you cannot prove a student's connection to non-taxable federal property, that student can't be counted for impact aid. So this is an example of a sample parent-pupil survey form. This can be found on impactaid.ed.gov, the U.S. Department of Education's Impact Aid program website, which has fabulous resources that you should definitely explore if you are interested. But there is very specific information that is required to be collected by the parent-pupil survey form. So you want to make sure that you are getting all of it and using their sample and having your program analyst at the department review your survey before you give it out is a good idea to ensure that your kids will count once you get those survey forms back. This is again available on impactaid.ed.gov. This is the sample source check form. So this would be the form that the school district fills out with the required information. So in this instance, this is your C category. These are your Indian land students. The school district would provide the parents' first and last name, the address, the student's first and last name, the grade, and whether or not they have an IEP or individualized education program. Which is important for that children with disabilities line item. So the school district would provide all of that information, and then it would be signed by particular individuals. So the LEA would certify that the kids are enrolled. The special education coordinator would certify that the kids have the IEP, and someone from the tribe would certify that the kids reside on the land. Someone from BIA or Tribal Realty would certify that the land is federally tax exempt. And so this, again, is specifically for those Category C Indian land students. The department also has samples available for military students and low rent housing students if you are interested in exploring those resources. Again, there are a number of things to keep in mind when doing that survey. One is just making sure that your forms collect the needed data. Your school district could lose eligibility if they don't, or students that might count that should count won't because that data isn't connected. So again, we highly recommend that the school district show your forms to your impact aid analyst to get approval prior to distributing them. You're going to need to keep all of your records for 3 years after your final payments. So that's every parent, every parent-pupil survey form, every source check, all of your documentation needs to be kept for 3 years after the final payment. We typically say that is 5 years in total, but actually for FY25, the U.S. Department of Education for the first time got impact aid payments out in the same fiscal year as they were appropriated. So it'll be 3 years after the date of that final payment. Keep your records that long. So how many federally connected children are there? That has varied a lot over the course of the program. So like we mentioned, initially only civilian students were eligible. The military on and off base, the Indian lands, the low rent housing, they joined, that eligibility was added later. So 94, there were almost 1.8 million students in the program. That number has dropped substantially over the past 30 years. If you look even at your FY24, there was a big drop that year. And that, as I mentioned earlier, was in part due to our COVID relief legislation, the Impact Aid Coronavirus Relief Act and the Impact Aid Supplemental Flexibility Act, which allowed school districts to use their pre-COVID counts. So FY24 was really the first time that all of the enrollment changes that happened during those COVID years were reflected accurately in a student count. And that was a big drop. I mean, that was a 17% drop in federally connected students. And there was another smaller drop this past year. We don't anticipate significant changes in the student count for FY26, though we will see what the Department of Education comes back with when they finished analyzing that data. But overall, when you include all of the school districts or all of the students enrolled in federally impacted school districts, whether they're 7002 school districts or 7003 school districts, there's approximately 8 million in the United States. So we always say at this point, Impact aid serves approximately 8 million students. Something to keep in mind, though, is that the impact aid payment formula doesn't pay you based on the exact number of students you have. It pays you based on the number of weighted federal student units in your school district. Because different students have different financial impacts on the school districts, they're weighted differently. And again, you get paid on those weighted units, not on the students. So students residing on Indian Trust or restricted lands have the highest weight. They're weighted a 1.25. Your military on-base and your civilian live-on work-ons are both weighted a 1.0. Your military off-base students are weighted a 0.20. And the reason for that kind of discrepancy is that if a student is living off of federal property, if they're not living on the installation, they're probably living in housing that pays property taxes. And remember, the impact aid program reimburses for lost local property taxes. So the financial impact of those off-base kids is a little different than those on-base kids. Students in federal low rent housing are 0.1, and those civilian live on or work-ons are weighted at 0.05. And this is an example of how that plays out. So if you are a school district and you have 500 students, all of whom are federally connected, and there's 100 students of 5 different types, you'll have a total population federally connected of 500. You're always going to convert that to average daily attendance because impact aid isn't about the enrollment, it's about the attendance. So pretend if your ADA ratio is 0.937, those 100 kids will turn into 93.7 kids. And then you're going to apply your weights. So your Indian land kids are going to get that 1.25 weight, your military on base that 1.0, your off base that 0.2, your low rent housing that 0.1, and your civilian live or work on are going to get that 0.05. So ultimately, once you have gone through this exercise, your 500 total federally connected students translate into 243.63 weighted student units. And that is the number that is used in the impact aid payment calculation. So once you have your weighted student units, the impact aid payment formula for basic support includes the actual cost of education. And that's what's known as the local contribution rate, or LCR. In most cases, that is determined by the National Center for Education Statistics at the U.S. Department of Education, which automatically calculates 3 different options for each school district, and it will automatically give you the highest of those 3. And so that would be either half the national average per pupil expenditure from 3 years prior, which is the most recent data available to them, half the state average per pupil expenditure from 3 years prior, or for school districts located in states where the local contribution to education is higher than in other places, there's something called the percent local revenue, which will help you make up for that. So the U.S. Department of Education calculates those 3 automatically and gives you the highest. Some states use something called generally comparable districts, which involves cooperation between the State Department of Education and the federal government to organize districts in certain ways to ensure that the students get comparable funding to the districts in their state. But for the most part, it's that half the national, half the state, or the percent local revenue that school districts are getting for their LCR. So assuming that Congress gave all of the money to the impact aid program that it needed, a school district's payment would be calculated by taking the number of weighted federal student units times that local contribution rate. So if we're going back to our example with that 243.6, in FY24, half the national average LCR was $7,444.50. So in FY24, you take your 243.6 weighted student units times the LCR, and you get an impact aid maximum payment or a full funding payment of about 1.8 million. In FY25, there was a big jump in the LCR. It went up to 8262. So that's that bottom line there. And so if you had that same number of weighted student units times the LCR from that year, your impact aid payment would be just over $2 million. Now that big jump was in large part due to the fact that COVID relief funds that the federal government gave out were incorporated into the LCR payment formula. So that was a more than 10% increase, which is very unusual. But it really illustrates how the LCR is the dollar driver of that basic support payment. It also kind of illustrates that if impact aid doesn't get an increase, even if your maximum payment, your full funding payment goes up, which it will if with inflation or like as happened last year, there's additional federal funding included. Just because your maximum payment goes up, if Congress doesn't give us more money, you're not going to get any more money. And in fact, Congress really doesn't give us enough money for this program. It hasn't been fully funded since 1969. And so there is a proration formula in the law that helps distribute impact aid funds based on need. And that is known as the Learning Opportunity Threshold. So every Section 7003 school district has its own lot. That is a needs-based proration. It's calculated by taking the percentage of federally connected students in enrollment plus the percentage of the local budget made up of the impact aid maximum payment. And your lot percentage may never be higher than 100%. So if all of your students are federally connected, it doesn't matter what percent local, the percent the impact aid payment is of your budget, your lot will just be 100%. And here's an example of how that works. So if you have a school district that's maximum or full funding payment is $100,000, and their total current expenditures, we're looking 3 years prior because that's the most recent data available from NCES, is $2 million. $100,000 is 5% of $2 million. If that school district had 25% of their average daily attendance made up of federally connected students, their lot percentage is going to be 25% plus 5% or 30%. So for that school district with our proration formula, assuming Congress gives us enough money to pay 100% lot, that means that 30% lot school district is going to get 30% of their maximum payment, or $30,000 in this instance. Now, as what happened last year, sometimes appropriations aren't even high enough to fund the proration formula. And what happens then is everybody gets an equal percentage of their lot that is less than 100%. So if you're a 100% lot district and last year it paid out just over 94%, you would get 94% of that payment. For that 30% lot school district, they would get 94% of 30% of their maximum payment. In the event that lot can, that appropriations will cover more than 100% of lot, which was the case a couple of years prior, every school district will receive an additional payment, evenly prorated, with no school district receiving more than their full funding payment. So all 100% lot school districts would get their maximum payment, and other school districts would get, a prorated payment, increasing the lot just a couple percent as the appropriation allows. As Jason mentioned, like for 7002, we do a payments overview each year. We're working on the FY25. This one's from FY24. And this kind of illustrates that lot issue. So if you're looking at the columns, the fourth and fifth columns, your FY24 payment and your full funding payment, you look down at Lapway there, they're 100% lot district. So because the appropriation covered 100% of lot, in FY24, their payment equaled approximately their full funding payment. Excuse me. Now you look up at Blackfoot. That's a 34% lot district. So if you look at their actual payment for FY24, which is about just under 1.3 million. If the program were fully funded, they would get about 3.385 million. Because it's not, but it paid out about 100% a lot, they got approximately 34% of that full funding payment. So one other quick note about the basic support program with children with disabilities. This is our 7003D line item. As I mentioned, in FY25, it got about $48 million. Again, that number has been the same for a long time. This is an additional payment specifically for Indian Land and military students with active IEPs, or individualized education programs. So unfortunately, civilian students and low-rent housing students are not considered in this. It's only Indian Land and military students. And this is one of the only sections of the Impact Aid program where there are restrictions on how the funds are spent. CWD money must be spent on IDEA eligible activities. Now, this is a much simpler payment calculation than the regular 7003B formula. They simply take the total appropriation, so that $48.316 million, and divide it by the number of eligible weighted student units across the nation. And the weighting here is a little bit simpler too. Indian Land and military on-base students are each weighted a 1.0, and military off-base students are weighted a 0.5. So the Department of Education adds up all of those weights, divides it into the appropriation, and gets a per weighted student unit payment. In FY25, that was approximately $1,220 per weighted student unit, or per military on-base or Indian Land student, or it's about $610 for those military off-base students. One other section that that we don't typically cover in this webinar, but we did put in this year, is called the hold harmless. So the hold harmless was added in the ESSA reauthorization, and it's a 3-year step down that helps school districts adjust when they face a significant drop in payment, and that is defined as 20% or more. So if a school district's payment is projected to drop by 20% or more over the previous year, they are automatically go into the hold harmless. In the first year of that hold harmless, they will receive 90% of the previous year's payment. The next year, they will receive 85% of that first year payment. And then the year after that, they will receive 80% of that year 2 payment. And so the goal, again, is to help school districts adjust if there are circumstances that cause a significant change, a significant decrease in their impact aid payment. Now, if at any point the calculated payment is higher than what the school district would get in the hold harmless, the school district falls out of the hold harmless and would get its calculated payment. And this all happens, that happens automatically. The U.S. Department of Education takes care of that. This was a particularly unique context this past year because 441 of the 932 total 703 school districts qualified for the hold harmless. So that's about 47% of basic support school districts were in the hold harmless in FY 2025. Another section of note in the impact aid law is the Indian policies and procedures. So school districts that serve students residing on Indian trust and restricted lands are required to submit these IPPs with their impact aid application. The purpose of this document is really to ensure that the school district has had meaningful dialogue with the tribes that they serve, and that participation in the school program by Indian and non-Indian children is equal. So if a school district, is so inclined and has a good relationship with their tribe, the tribes can waive the need for the IPPs. If a school district serves multiple tribes, all of the tribes in the community would need to waive those needs, or you'll still have to do them. And this is now, a longstanding section of the program. Most school districts that serve Indian land students have successfully implemented this many times in the past, but if you are looking to change your IPPs, we do recommend that you share the draft with your impact aid program analyst to ensure that they continue to meet the requirements of the law. So, and now I'm going to turn it back to Jason to talk about school construction.
Thank you. In these next couple slides, we'll be discussing the Section 7007 construction program. This line is currently appropriated at 19 million and is composed of two sections. As you probably guessed, that 19 million for every federally impacted school is not a lot, so it's been a priority of NAFIS to try to increase that over the last few years, for many years actually. So there are two sections of the construction program, 7007A formula grants, which are designed to meet capital and construction needs, and section 7007B discretionary grants, a few grants per funding cycle with priority given to districts with little to no bonding capacity for emergency repairs. Formula grants are in even fiscal years, and competitive grants are in odd fiscal years, the exception of FY25. That's due to the continuing resolution under which the government is operating and a lack of specific instruction included in the general appropriations bill. For FY 2026, we'll be doing formula grants. In order to be eligible, your district must serve 50% or more Indian land students, 50% or more military dependent students, or receive Section 7003B2 funds. So in these next couple slides, we'll kind of go over some current events at NAFIS and some of our priorities here. First up, application and payments deadlines. Applications are due February 2nd, 2026, not January 31st, as it is in most years. You'll have to submit your application through the Impact Aid grant system at impactaid.ed.gov. If your application is 1 to 60 days late, that will equal a 10% reduction in Impact Aid payments. And if your application is 61 days late or later, that will equal a total loss of Impact Aid payment funding. So make sure you get those applications submitted in time. Also want to note that you must this is kind of a new development, I believe, with the system. You must log into your IAGS system account every 120 days to keep your account active. If your account goes inactive, it will either need to be reactivated by your district's core user, or if it was the core user that went active, the department will have to reactivate your account. So it's good to set a reminder to log in periodically. Also, all payments and payment notifications are done electronically. Finally, if your district needs to receive its first FY 2026 Impact Aid payment before the end of December 2025 to cover its expenses, please request an early payment through IAGS. If the department is operating under a continuing resolution for the start of FY 2026, meaning that they receive only a small percentage of the funds appropriated for that fiscal year, rather than the full appropriation for the year, they will prioritize initial payments for districts that need that money the most. Moving on to our current NAFIS priorities. So first off, as always, is appropriations. This now for fiscal year 2026. Both the President's budget and the Senate's Labor, Health, Education Appropriations Bill call for level funding of the Impact Aid programming, meaning there will be no increase in funds for the second consecutive year. First off, just level setting for the way things are in DC right now, we have to keep in mind that given the current political environment on education policy, Impact Aid has fared pretty well. The Impact Aid office has so far been spared from the massive staffing cuts at the Department of Education, and the President's budget has not proposed cutting or modifying the program. That said, we all know that a continued stagnation in funding is unacceptable. Given the recent trends in student counts, we expect that without an increase in appropriations, the law percentage will drop again in FY26. It is incumbent upon all of us to make it clear to Congress that level funding is effectively a cut in funding, and relay to them how your school district will have to deal with decreases in funding. It's important to make those stories about cuts local. Now is the time to be reaching out to your representatives. You can use the NAFIS Action Center. And also, if you're going to be here in DC for our fall conference, be sure you're reaching out to your member offices to set up meetings. You can also reach out to the district offices back in your home state to set up meetings as well. You can reach out to me if you need help identifying who your member of Congress is or who the appropriate staffers are to reach out to. Going down our kind of priority list here, our first legislative priority introduced this year is the Impact Aid Infrastructure Partnership Act. That's led by Senator Mazie Hirono, Congressman John Garamendi, and Congressman Jay Obernolte. This bill allocates $250 million annually for 4 years to the Impact Aid construction program, targeting the significant backlog of infrastructure projects in federally impacted school districts. Another bill that we've recently endorsed, is the Fairness in Education Funding Act. This is being led by Congressman Pat Ryan from New York. This bill would prevent the president and the Secretary of Education from making significant changes to the federal impact aid program, absent an act of Congress or a court order. Finally, we're working with members of Congress to introduce the following 2 pieces of legislation in the coming weeks. We hope to have them ready for you when those folks come to DC for the conference. One will be first off is the reintroduction of the Advancing Towards Impact Aid Full Funding Act. This bill would significantly increase appropriations for the Impact Aid program as part of a 5-year guide path to put us closer towards full funding for the basic support program. It would also provide significant investments in the federal property and construction lines. And finally, we're working with members of Congress in both houses to introduce a resolution honoring the 75th anniversary of Impact Aid. This resolution would designate September 30th as Impact Aid Day in recognition of the 75th anniversary of the program being signed by President Truman. As mentioned earlier, it's important for everyone to kind of get engaged. You can get involved by using the NAFIS Action Center, which you can find at nafisdc.org, attending one of our 2 annual NAFIS conferences here in DC, and sharing and following us on social media at NAFIS Schools, including Twitter, now X, and Facebook. And as we're gearing up for the 75th anniversary of Impact Aid in a couple weeks, we need your help bringing awareness of the importance of this program. As mentioned, we hope to see you all in a few weeks here in DC for our fall conference, again, where we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the program. You can find more details and register at nafisdc.org/conferences/events. Federally impacted schools Education Foundation will be hosting 3 technical workshops in the coming months. Our first one will be right here in DC in September 13th. Sorry. Next up, we'll be holding a workshop in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The exact date on that is still to be determined, so keep an eye on our communications for an announcement there. And finally, we'll be hosting a workshop in Las Vegas on December 7th. You can find a list of all these workshops at nafisdc.org/FISIF/workshops. And so I think now we'll work on answering any questions you all might have. I have the email address for Anne and myself here on the computer, here on the screen, sorry.
Thank you, Jason. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat to get to, but I also wanted to provide an opportunity for our incoming NAFIS Executive Director to do an introduction to herself if she wants. I know she is here. We are hopeful that we will be able to get her to be able to unmute and to turn her camera on. So Charisse, I am attempting.
Just allowed mic and camera for her. But
Hi, everyone. This is Charisse. I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I'm driving at the moment, but it's just wonderful to be able to attend today's session and really understand better the program and get to know everyone. So we're looking forward to working with everyone on the call if you need assistance, but I'm looking forward also to joining the NAFIS team. Thanks, Anne and Jason.
Thank you, Charisse, and we're excited to have you. Just looking in the chat at some of the questions that have been asked so far. One is about the slides, and the slide deck will be available. It'll be distributed in NAFIS News this Friday, along with the recording of the webinar. There was, Dan, I see your note that to count special education students, the active IEP must be on the student count date, which is not the same as they've ever had an IEP or they had one last year, or if you implement one after your count date. So yes, the IEP needs to be active on the count date. And this is just also a point to emphasize that the school district gets to choose the count date. So if there is a time that you know your federal enrollment population is the highest, or that you have finished, you're well underway with your IEP process for the year, you can select your count date to strategically, maximize that count. If the question so Scott, I see your question. We have students who live on Indian land but attend a school district off Indian land. Is that school eligible for impact aid funding? So a student who resides on Indian land and attends a school off of the Indian land is eligible to be counted for impact aid. Whether that school is eligible depends on if they meet the other eligibility requirements. So if they have 400 students in average daily attendance, or the federally connected student population is 3% of their average daily attendance. But yes, if a student resides on a reservation but attends school off the reservation, they will still count for impact aid. There is an important note around state lines. So a school can only count students that reside in its state for impact aid. And so if a school district, for example, I know the Navajo Nation crosses a number of different states. If a student resides in Utah but attends school in Arizona, that student may not be counted for impact aid unless a formal agreement exists between the states that allows them to be counted. In terms of IPPs being approved by all students' tribes, yes, I see, Dan, your comment that the reservation is the determining approval entity. Yes, and this is land-based. So, and this is also something to kind of just reiterate that impact students are not eligible for impact aid just because they're Native American. They are eligible for impact aid because of their connection to federally owned land, or land that is held in trust by the federal government. So students who are Native American who do not reside on Indian lands are not eligible for to be counted for impact aid. But students who are not Native American who reside on Indian lands are eligible to be counted for impact aid. And then a question on finding more information on transitioning to digital surveying options. So I would again then direct you to impactaid.ed.gov, which is it's the Department of Education's website for the impact aid grant system, and they have resources specifically on the electronic data collection, and they can help you. If you submit a question to their EDC team, they can help you identify one, if you want to be part of the electronic data collection, or if you want to use some digital surveying options that maybe aren't officially part of the EDC, that would be more in line with doing digital versions of parent pupil surveys. So the department will have to work with you on that one directly. Are there other questions? All right, well, seeing none, thank you so much for joining us. Jason and I'll stay on for another couple minutes. If you have additional questions, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.